You're listening to People Are Animals Too, Darn It, with your host, Mandy Evans, Executive Director of Panhandle Animal Shelter.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of People Are Animals Too, Darn It. Today, we have a wonderful guest. His name is Jason Schipkowski, and he is the marketing manager for the Pets for Life program, a program of the Humane Society of the United States. His bio is Jason Schipkowski is a program manager for the Humane Society of the United States Pets for Life program. In his role, he provides in-depth guidance to organizations on how to sustain their outreach efforts in underserved communities, incorporating a holistic approach to program sustainability, including elevating individual and organizational understanding of social justice issues, communications approaches, and fundraising best practices. He provides organizations with tools, strategies, and confidence to nurture their pet owner support work long term. Hello, Jason. Thank you so much for joining me today. So today we're on a podcast called People Are Animals Too, Darn It.
It's an excellent name.
I get to say darn it a lot now. And I appreciate you joining me and wanted you to take a little time to tell everybody what is Pets for Life.
I would love to. Thank you for the opportunity. So Pets for Life is a program within the Humane Society of the United States. And the real goal is to create equity and access to pet services for people in underserved communities. And so we approach the mission and the work with kind of the philosophy that regardless of racial or socioeconomic or geographic boundaries, everyone deserves to experience the love and companionship of a pet. And so we really kind of celebrate the human-animal bond, regardless of who the human is. And we connect with people in underserved communities through door-to-door outreach, focusing on relationship building in a really kind of non-judgmental, trust-building way.
Yeah, and it's truly amazing. We actually talked to Dr. Marty Becker recently, and he was sharing about how he went into veterinary medicine as part of this goal of being a dairy, I don't know what the name is, clinician, I guess, and then decided that he really loved the human-animal bond, and but it's carried through. That love of the human-animal bond is carried through for him. And I feel like all of us have been in animal welfare, and we've really felt like that's the work we're doing, but it isn't until PFL came about that really that focus was truly being served.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've all said it. I've been in the animal welfare field for about a decade now, and I am guilty. When I first started working at a rescue and shelter organization where I live in St. Louis, Missouri, I was very guilty of saying like, oh, I get to work with animals, like I don't like people. And, you know, everybody's heard that that line before, said it at some point. And I was first connected with the Pets for Life program as a mentorship partner. So as a program, we support and provide kind of in-depth training and guidance to partner organizations all around the country. And it really runs the gamut with kind of types of environments. So densely populated urban environments, really isolated rural environments, indigenous communities. And so the work is effective regardless of the type of community, as long as you approach the community with respect and understanding and truly listen to what people's needs and barriers are.
Yeah.
And so when I first started the work, it was in 2012, and I was the marketing and development director for this shelter. And I wrote one of the first rounds of mentorship grants back then to become kind of a PFL partner. And I trained in Chicago, and the veil was lifted and there was no coming back for me. It really showed me a whole new perspective and way of thinking about our work. And I came back and I implemented the program within the organization, and it was a game changer for me. And it's great to see over time how many amazing organizations like Panhandle Animal Shelter and all of our PFL partners, how much people care about being a resource to their community and broadening our animal welfare bubble to include everyone.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a phenomenal program, which we just started at our shelter this year, but the foundation of the program has impacted us for many years. It's one of the reasons that we went through a huge cultural change. But I'm curious, how did it start? Like, who realized one day that this is the work we should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, Amanda Arrington, who is our senior program director, she was the state director in North Carolina at HSUS for a while, and it was a passion for her. I know she had done a lot of work just kind of discovering, investigating how a program like this might work, and not just kind of theoretical or based on the philosophy, but in addition to kind of the philosophical piece of creating equity and access to resources, she really focused on, with the support, of course, others in a team, she really focused on the logistics and the way to get into communities and connect with people and do it in this really kind of authentic way where we're listening to people, we're building relationships with people. And so since then, and that was about 10 years ago. And so really since then, it's been, like I said, really great to see all of these organizations around the country really recognizing community-based work and pet owner support work as a really mission critical component to our movement.
Yes, absolutely. So I think for people who don't know what Pets for Life really is it was a great description. Like, that is it to a T, except that it's the stories. We need to hear the story to truly get the impact. So do you have a favorite story that you like to share?
Oh, favorite. That's tough. There's a lot of really good stories, but I think since we're talking about kind of the catalyst for the program, share my first story and kind of connection to the program. So I mentioned that I trained in Chicago, and when I came back to St. Louis, we spent a little time getting the foundation of the program set up. Working on who is actually going to be delivering services. We had an in-house clinic. And so all the kind of logistical particulars to make sure once we started knocking on doors, we could really support the community fully and in the way we wanted to. And so I remember we started, the zip code was 63107. So it's a very focused program. And so I always view it as kind of dropping a pebble in the pond. Where that pebble hits is the very first door we knock on, and we radiate over time. And by time, I mean years. So we're really developing and taking time to develop relationships with people. We started on a street that I had heard as the marketing and development director that was this really, like, that's the street you didn't go to, right? Like, it was like just neglect and cruelty is rampant, and we just really need to be careful if we're out like rescuing or picking up dogs or cats. And so, of course, naturally, that's the place that we wanted to start. And I could have not been more wrong. And it was my very first time within this type of work to kind of hold up a mirror to myself and recognize my own biases and tendency to stereotype the entirety of North City, St. Louis, which is predominantly African-American. And so it was a hard lesson, but a really important lesson, and one I'm really open about because I think that we're all kind of on this journey of learning and being better humans. And that was a critical time for me. And so we were knocking on doors, and I connected with Willie Ann Burston. She's this 86-year-old woman who worked in the hospitality industry in St. Louis and told me all of these really cool old stories about St. Louis history. And that was it. It was this really wonderful, gratifying human experience. And when I went back to the shelter, since I was the marketing guy, I looked at this. I had remembered I had written a rescue web story on our website. And as an organization, we had a pretty big platform to share ideas and connect with kind of our stakeholders. And the story really emphasize it was very dramatic, to be perfectly honest. Like, it was about, like neglect running rampant and probably drug use and like really like not okay things. And it was a hard lesson. And the most drug use on that street was probably Mrs. Burston's high blood pressure medication or something. And so, but it was, I think, an important transformation for me to realize that moving forward, as we ourselves, HSUS PFL, as well as the PFL partner organizations that we work with, how we go about kind of telling the story of this work and really being a conduit through which we can tell the community story.
Yeah, and I think that what you guys do as well is that you come at it with shelters and people in the community, like in the animal welfare community. You work with us with such grace, because it's almost like you've known that you went through this awakening or transformation, and that there's so many of us that maybe haven't, or we maybe have in like this little itty bitty section, and then there's a broader scope. And we're also built to kind of go towards the negative, or unfortunately in our world right now, so much of the news and everything that's shared is negative, and we get this fear inside of us. And so what you guys are doing, and really what we've seen in our community as well, is doing oh my gosh, I wish this could be everywhere in every aspect of our lives, is this idea that people are a lot deeper than we give them credit for. All we do is just label people. You're this, you're this, you're this. And then we base our interactions off of that label. But really, people are wonderful and kind and misunderstood. And so that's the work we're doing, even with this podcast, is trying to share that there is so much more to people. We come in an environment here that's very politically different. We've got a lot of a divide there. And I always say that if you get stuck in a snowbank, you may have a Republican or a Democrat help you out, and you'd have no idea. And why? Because they're good people.
Right.
That's what matters.
Yeah, exactly right. So many of our actions are fueled by like fear and these really ingrained stereotypes. And, we all approach relationships and experiences with our own biases. We all have them. You have them. I have them. It's, we're a product of our environments growing up and who we're around and the experiences we have and the privilege we have. And so it's really important to, get outside of the shelter walls, get outside of our office walls, and get out into the community in this work, so we can talk to people face to face. And more importantly, we can listen to people face to face on their front porches, at their kitchen tables. I can say that I've learned way more from people in the community than I'm sure I've ever kind of knowledge that I've imparted to residents of those communities. And a hallmark of the program is being in close proximity, so we can understand, so we can create policies and procedures that are more inclusive and are expanding our animal welfare bubble to include other people, and not just creating kind of policies from a very limited kind of privileged point of view, and making sure that whatever we do and however we do it is really being mindful and understanding of more experiences than just ourselves. Because just to call out kind of the elephant in the room, it's a very predominantly white field, and unfortunately, kind of race and ethnicity is such a determinant of people's experiences. And so it really behooves all of us in the field to kind of recognize our own limitations in terms of lack of diversity, and really push ourselves to have a deeper understanding of what everyone is going through.
Yeah, and own it. Like, I think that's a big thing. That it was Rachel on your team that said, I said, well, I'm so uncomfortable, and I can't remember the situation. And she goes, then tell someone that you're uncomfortable. And then you start out at a point where you're being vulnerable enough that they feel like they have the opportunity to help you be a better person. So one of the things another thing I love about the program that I'm hoping catches on is the idea that we try to mandate behavior through punitive actions. Like, if you don't have that collar on your dog, then you're going to get a ticket. Yeah. And I feel like what Pets for Life does is it uses an influencing approach, It's like, I'm going to understand you. I'm going to understand where you're coming from. I'm going to honor that that is your decision and that you may do things differently than I would do them. But then building that relationship, you're able to help them understand your point of view. What we should be doing in everything in our world, in politics, everything is understanding the other points of view of others so that we can influence a better world.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think that, as a program, we often refer to kind of individuals that are being served at the program as clients, but so that just seems inadequate because it really is a partnership. And even kind of before kind of the conversation around kind of working to kind of have mutual understanding with people in a community that, I'm not from, is that most people are incredibly similar. And so, about, say, for instance, like spay neuter, the vast majority of the people already, we're not like spay neuter robots, like trying to sell somebody on something. Like, it really is. People want services and resources just as much as you and I. There might be kind of maybe some misinformation or lack of information that has been shared because of the nature of living in kind of an area that has not had resources and has been kind of overlooked and looked down upon for a long time. I think that, often we think of kind of resource deserts as areas there where there's not kind of physical direct services, but it's also kind of lack of information. I was just reading an article the other day about here in St. Louis about the digital divide in North City, St. Louis, and the really high percentage of people that don't have access to the internet. And so there's all of these, and that was new kind of thought to me. And so there's all of this nuance to people's experiences and the barriers and kind of systemic and institutional challenges that people experience in accessing service, whether it's poverty, whether it's transportation, whether it's a isolated, rural community with spatial inequity where the closest clinic or pet supply store is hundreds of miles away. There's all of these stories weaved into this narrative that are important for us all to look at.
Yeah, and they're not looked at. I mean, that's the main thing, is that people are judged off of this perception that they have access, and they don't have access. So we just went into a community, our Pets for Life program went into a community that if you had asked that community before if they would have taken advantage of services, I guarantee everyone would have said no. You're going to have a gun drawn on you, and you need to watch out. And so here I am sending one of our team members into that community, and we've had a huge rate of success of people really appreciating that we're offering the service and getting to know this beautiful community that's very connected. You guys have talked about going into more of the rural, but going into urban areas where really neighbors help neighbors. There's a strong community there, and we're seeing that too. And these houses are miles from each other, and yet there's this really strong sense of community, just really fun to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everyone listening, however, I want to stress that don't let kind of the fears and anxieties of kind of going out and knocking on your first door be a barrier for you to getting out, because you're exactly right. I have had the good fortune to be able to work with all of these amazing groups across the country and see all types of different communities, and I have yet to have a bad experience, and that's honest. I mean, it's and I think because the program and kind of the methodology is so heavily reliant on kind of relationships and trust building and following up and showing up day in, day out, multiple times a week, every day sometimes. People appreciate that. When we're talking about kind of being of service to underserved communities, a lot of times organizations, and not just animal welfare, just service providers in general, whether it's healthcare, human service, employment opportunities, there's a lot of different things that might show up. Maybe a program is grant-based, and a year later, the resource is gone. And that's just not what Pets for Life is. We're in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
And that's a big focus for us as a program, certainly in the last couple of years has been on kind of program sustainability. So once again, I see the PFL sustainability guide in the background there.
Oh, yeah.
That's a resource that can be found on pflequity.org. And it's a really kind of robust, comprehensive tool on how to not just kind of get dollars to sustain your program, but having kind of the individual and organizational building blocks to be able to speak to the work articulately and kind of all the nuance that we're talking about. So in that guide, we go over things like different roles within the organization and what role does leadership have in really upholding these kind of very human and non-judgmental values and equity and access. And we talk about, confronting our personal and organizational biases, and we have kind of different lesson plans and activities to be able to kind of bring it to life in the way that we're talking about, so you can really learn it and feel it and understand it.
Yeah, I know our community, whenever they hear about the work we're doing, they're completely amazed at, especially going door to door. That's always a big deal. And this is, maybe you don't have statistics or data on this, but I'm making the assumption that shelters that utilize pets for life have a lower degree of compassion fatigue. Do you think, would that be accurate, or?
I don't have the numbers on that, but I can only maybe speak for, I'll only speak for kind of personal experience.
Yeah.
I know that whenever I started this work, like I was, as the marketing and development person, other than kind of donor meetings and things like that, like I was really in the shelter like a lot of the time. And I was so jazzed whenever I got to get out in the community and talk to people and kind of break down some of these barriers and kind of bridge the service and kind of resource gap. It was a very inspiring humanistic thing. That's why another reason why it's so great that more organizations and more individuals across the country are really, really embracing this work, is there's a network of people to be able to kind of not just talk about the realities of a lot of different pet owners that aren't usually in the animal welfare orbit, but also offers an opportunity for us to kind of create systemic solutions together. So hopefully we can start moving the needle forward for every pet owner.
So let me ask you about the use of negative story fundraising and marketing, because I feel like we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot. A lot of people will give us gifts they'll write in the gift, thank you for all your work helping all those abandoned, neglected, and abused animals in your shelter. And we're very vocal about it. Like, we just tell people that is not the case. And we try not to do any type of human shaming, like diminish one to build up the other is not a good idea. So how do you feel about the environment we're in?
There's a lot of work still, a long ways to go, and a lot of work to kind of improve some of those narratives. But I've seen progress, and I think that, for, like I mentioned earlier, I came from a more kind of traditional marketing background, like using more traditional kind of like the hero, the abuse, the neglect, the rescue, rehab, kind of like traditional stories in our field. And I find that more often than not, kind of whoever is doing kind of marketing communication are fearful that this kind of message is too humanistic. We're focusing too much on humans. What about the people who say that if you can't afford a pet, you shouldn't have one? Some of those things that unfortunately we hear sometimes. And it's usually, I think there's a desire to kind of tell a more nuanced story about kind of community-based work. But I think either people are fearful of not receiving the same level of donations because so many fundraising programs are kind of built on some of those traditional messages, or people really want to, but we talk, inevitably we go through kind of conversations around, social justice conversations, racial equity, and kind of sensitive, weighty topics that I think a lot of people who come from a place of privilege aren't used to kind of really kind of understanding and digging into kind of the language and the nuance of those things.
Right.
So I think some people are just apprehensive because they don't want to be offensive or kind of say the wrong thing. And I think that's a really great place to start, because if that's your starting point, then you'll have it as long as you invest the time and you listen and you kind of get outside of kind of the echo chamber that sometimes we tend to be in.
Yeah, and I think in social work, whether that's animal welfare or anything, you really have to lean into your fear.
Yeah. Yep.
Because it's the only way to truly make a significant impact in your community, is that you're going to upset certain segments of the population potentially, and that you have to, being here, we've made so many changes with our protocols and things that I thought the community would completely, like, not breed labeling. When that came up, I'm like, oh, geez, we're going to have all these people. And then we just tell the honest truth. We talked about why we were making the change and communicated it. And it's been fine. So I think I've become more, and I'm a fear-based person. Like, I don't leave my home in the winter. It's snowing today. It's impressive. I drove to work. Like, I am definitely have fear. But being in this job has really pushed me to lean into it more and to try new things. And I found that most of the risks we take aren't really risks. They just are really good decisions.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Most, if not all, of the partner groups that I've worked with on some of these sustainability efforts, whether it's kind of more internal initiatives to kind of rally staff around this type of work and this type of philosophy, or whether it's more kind of external messages and having kind of an integrated marketing campaign where, you're highlighting kind of this work on the website, and you're also sending e-blasts to your entire donor base or your kind of supporters, having kind of a really kind of robust, consistent social media presence around kind of telling the story of this work, and not just people's individual stories, but kind of why lack of access exists in the first place, was with these kind of systemic barriers that we're talking about. Overall, it's really well received. And so I think that the more, nobody wants to be first, right? Nobody wants to stick their neck out and like see if it works, see if it doesn't. But the more organizations are really doing this, the more I think people are seeing that there's not just some really great opportunities to fundraise and kind of build organizational brands around this really kind of innovative and positive supportive work, but it taps into potentially a whole new kind of donor base where we're engaging people, because there's such a clear confluence between kind of the human and animal element in this work. We're engaging community foundations that haven't historically provided funding for animal welfare groups. And we're finding individuals that are really social justice minded. And so we're engaged, we're kind of tapping into that piece of the philanthropic pie outside of kind of the smaller sliver of animal welfare and the environment. And we're getting into kind of other opportunities. And I think we're finally kind of starting to see some really great movement there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I think anytime that we're able to work with the community, our community really loves us now because of the work. And so I want to say our story a little bit that, and I don't remember, but when did you guys do the general session at the HSUS Conference? When you had all the different groups come up and tell their stories?
Oh, God, it all runs together. That was it kind of like the main?
It was in New Orleans.
Oh, okay. I mean, was it this?
No.
Okay, so it was probably, so the at Animal Care Expo, it was whatever the 10-year anniversary of Katrina was. So this was probably like 2015-ish.
Okay.
Something like that. So yeah, that was it.
And I was sitting in that session, and I'm like, it just hit me, that awakening hit me, where I thought, oh my gosh, like we are doing the work that they're talking about not doing. Like, it was just this wake up call. And when it was all over, I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to go ask him a question. And it wasn't you. It was, I can't remember. I think he was from one of the Boston shelters. And
oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I said, well, what if somebody adopts two dogs, a large dog and a Chihuahua, and they're bonded, and they say they're going to care for both of them, And then we find the large dog on Facebook. And he was like, well, maybe they just couldn't keep it, and maybe your requirement was more than what they could handle, and you made people lie to you. And I'm like,
oh,
maybe.
Right. There's
coming back, and trying to explain that to the team and really change things. But I have another a good story. It just happened, and it's meaningful because I feel like our whole team now is really like, it's taken years of us. We've built the culture, but we had a gentleman who had to have his dog quarantined here, and he was not a very happy man. He was really upset. I don't know that he fully understood why his dog was being quarantined. We're not a municipal agency. We have contracts. So we were told we had to, quarantine this dog. But the team actually went to our operations manager and said, I'm really having a hard time working with this man because he's kind of abrasive. He's yelling, he's in the lobby, and he wouldn't leave. Like, he's in there for 2 hours. And she said, his name's Devin, and said, you know what? I want you to try to understand where he's coming from. And that he's angry, but that really is driven from fear or sadness. Can you figure out where that is, and then treat him in a different way? Yeah. Well, by the end of it, this guy comes in, he gets his dog, he's crying, he's handwritten cards to the team, he's given them gas cards, and it was because we just took the time to understand him. And that's the work we're trying to do, is communicate that you can't support animals without supporting people. It has to be a priority. So I can't tell you, I know I've talked to Amanda a million times, I like a broken record, on how much we appreciate the work and how much it's influenced us. We are by far, I know that I'm a way better person because of what you guys are doing. I'm hoping that every shelter, this podcast, I'm hoping, isn't just watched by animal welfare people. I want donors to listen to it. I want people who have this general knowledge of animal welfare and the care to know that there's this amazing work being done out there that's making a huge impact on animals.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. And I think that it's so inspiring and rewarding to hear that, because none of us can do it alone. Like, there's plenty of work to go around. Unfortunately, generational deep-seated poverty and kind of lack of access is not going anywhere anytime soon. That is not being solved, to my knowledge. So it really is going to take all of us to kind of elevate this work and the conversation within the field and beyond, to really kind of amplify this message and create these systemic solutions that we're talking about to rise and meet the need of all pet owners. And, and think that, like you said before, with just like your staff transition from a 30,000 foot view, like it's a slow process. Like the field, that kind of change it doesn't come easy, but it's well worth it. And it's really great. The expo that you mentioned, the Animal Care Expo in New Orleans, at the 10-year anniversary of Katrina. I remember, I think that was my first expo when I had joined the Pets for Life team. And, back then we would do workshops or ask, like, who's heard of Pets for Life or who has community-based work. You'd have like a couple hesitant, like unsure people. And like you go, or you look at some of the other kind of wonderful major kind of national kind of leaders and local and regional leaders in the field, and people are really standing up and investing in this work and sharing their experiences and encouraging others to do it. So in a relatively short amount of time, it's come a very long way.
Yeah. Well, and nothing great happens easily or quickly. That's another thing, is that if we're going to go the easy route, it's probably not going to be the best route. Like this work.
There's really no shortcuts.
No shortcuts.
One of my favorite quotes was by Congressman John Lewis, and who is, of course, big in kind of the civil rights movement. And I heard a podcast where someone asked him about kind of his experiences during kind of the civil rights movement, and how some of those things, of course, many things are still going on today and still very much needed, and like how as someone who has been kind of on the ground, kind of fighting for civil rights and equity, how does it feel to still be kind of having some of the same conversations? And he spoke really like wonderfully about how so many things that you hear about, kind of marching, and you see photos, these iconic photos of the civil rights movement, but what you don't see is everything that was happening behind the scenes, and people who were doing the community organizing, people who were making meals to make sure everybody who was out there kind of fighting for rights were getting fed, and all of this is kind of like an iceberg. It's kind of a corny example, but it is. It's there's so much work happening kind of behind the scenes and under the surface. And he said that it's better to be a pilot light rather than a firecracker. And that really kind of resonated with me as like, in it for the long haul. Important change doesn't come easy or quickly, but it doesn't mean it's not worth doing and doing now.
Yeah, and I think doing it in animal welfare is a really great place, because utilizing animals to transition into the hearts of people really isn't any better way. It can be very effective.
Yeah.
I have one more question. I'm just wondering if you've seen any significant progress between shelters that are part of the program working within companion animal medicine with veterinary clinics, because there is that kind of tension between vets and shelters. Does PFL play a role in helping kind of bring these companion animal vets into understanding that people may not be able to afford vet care?
Yeah, we try to. We have some really part of that process and effort to connect with vets is working with and kind of developing official partnerships with like University of Wisconsin Vet School, Penn Vet, where it's actually part of the curriculum, and students are going out as part of their rotation to actually go do home visits with like the PFL outreach person and provide information and resources within the home. And it's a lot of students, if not all of the students, from what I understand, in their kind of journaling about their experiences throughout school, highlight kind of those experiences as like the most rewarding, the most eye-opening. And so in that way, we have these amazing partners and work with vet schools to try to kind of shed some light on another path for vets and up and coming vets, and at the very least have have veterinarians who are kind of coming out of school acknowledge and understand that there is a big resource gap, and they could have a direct impact in kind of bridging that gap a little bit. And then in addition to that, whenever Pets for Life starts in a new community, we always try to kind of stop by the vets, especially if it's a private practice vet who is going to be delivering services. Always kind of engaging them, listening to their concerns, because they're valid concerns. Vets come out of school with a astronomical amount of debt. There's a lot of pressure. And so similar, the same principles apply in relationship building in the community versus like partners. It's listening, it's understanding, it's having a dialogue about it so we can kind of find a solution. And it's a very data-driven program. So when we talk about the community assessment we do to figure out where we're going to focus our time and resources, and when we talk about the data that we collect across the country, kind of on average, 90% of the pets that we first meet in PFL focus areas have not been spayed and neutered. But then when you look at kind of delivering kind of this type of approach, then you see that most communities doing the work have a conversion rate, which is out of that 90% of pets that are not spayed and neutered, 80 to 90% are converted to being spay and neutered. And so, of course, not that the whole program is just about spay and neuter. We try to be as holistic as possible with kind of supplies and information and just kind of advocacy with housing issues, wellness care, non-spay and neuter medical care. But what we see with something like the conversion rate is people want services, they need services. It's just a matter of just showing up, sometimes. Yeah. And when we share some of that with the vet partners, people tend to get it. If not right away, at least, the proof is in the pudding sometimes. And when they see that we're while services are provided to people in the community at no cost, as a program, we are still kind of paying customers. And so we're transporting, pets to their clinic. We're paying on time, and because of the process of relationship building, following up, making sure that we're removing barriers for people to access services. Once there's that kind of high show rate on surgery day, people tend to realize that, like, oh, this isn't kind of cannibal, or this isn't this isn't eating into my business. It's really kind of supplementing and complementing it.
Right. Yeah. And I love that the University of Wisconsin is sending vet students out. Talk about like the pilot versus the firecracker, because those people they'll never be able to unlearn that. Like, that'll be a huge impact on their lives. And those are the people coming into my shelter eventually. Hopefully, we need a vet.
Right, exactly. And they're doing an amazing job, and the ASPCA is doing an amazing job with really advocating for kind of community-based work. And so, like, I think that you're seeing, what we're seeing is a real kind of step forward in this work and in this movement. And people are getting on board. Yeah,
we're seeing definitely good, positive change. It's really exciting. I get to go to the University of Wisconsin in Madison and teach. I don't know if I'm teaching class. I'm speaking to their vet students in February.
Oh, exciting!
I know. Talk about my fear thing. So I've had people on the team that told me they would drive me to the airport.
Nice. What will you be teaching?
I'm talking to them about, Dr. Newberry came into our shelter about, oh my gosh, it's been 6 years, I think now, and helped us with all our baseline medical, getting us on board with how we should be doing things, best practice. And then just our results from what we've been doing, and even though we've been Pets for Life, it came in second quarter, I think, of this year. We have been, ever since that seminar, the Humane Society Animal Care Conference, that has been, and that was like, I think one of my first or second year in the job, and it has just been like huge impact. And we've been following those basic principles, I guess, for a long time. But our results, like so back then we'd help about 1,200 animals a year, and we just ran the numbers, and we're looking at almost 7,000 this year.
Oh, wow.
And most of that is in the community. It's feeding people's pets that couldn't afford it, spay and neuter, community cat programs. We started a new program with the local hospital that actually won't launch till next year, but to be able to house people's pets so that their human can go have medical care.
Oh,
just all that. And so I think they're having me come to discuss really a success story. And we started our home-to-home program, which is primarily community-based, where people don't need to have these animals coming into shelters when they can't keep them. So a lot of what we do is empowering our community to help themselves, and the impact that makes is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that is really important, and I don't want to gloss over it, is the importance of leadership setting the tone, right? And I think that it can be sometimes a concern or a reality where the work lives out in the community, and so the outreach person is out knocking on doors, connecting with people, and I think sometimes that can feel isolated and operates on an island away from some of the other programs, initiatives within the organization. And of course, as you're talking about, kind of the philosophy of just kind of active listening and being a good person and being understanding and making sure we're making room at the table for everyone and everybody's voice is heard. That transcends just like Pets for Life or community work. Like, that shows up in the way we greet people at the front desk. That shows up in the way we hire through like DEI initiatives. Like, there's so many kind of different offshoots of the conversation. And it really is great to hear. And I'm very thankful for the work you're doing, because it it cements the work and it cements the philosophy when there's like a top-down message and it's part of the organization's DNA. And I think that can be attributed like your success you're talking about can be attributed a great deal to kind of that holistic approach. And I do want to say that I can't believe I haven't been more distracted by the dog that's on your lap. I haven't even mentioned he or she, but they're adorable.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there any books? I mean, I know this particular, your sustainability plan isn't, I mean, you guys don't offer that for sale or anything like that, do you? Any call to action that you want to include at the end of this?
Yeah, I would recommend definitely going to pflequity.org. It's a domain that we have that'll be redirected to Animal Sheltering Online, which is the companion animal department of HSUS. So it's that website. And so there you can download the sustainability guide PDF for free. Everything's free. There's our outreach toolkit, which is kind of our kind of foundational educational kind of toolkit piece that's like a start to finish kind of how you can start and implement and maintain a door-to-door outreach program like Pets for Life. And so kind of the logistics, and it's got like templates and forms to download. We're working on the updated version right now, actually. There's also, different kind of tools and resources and studies and papers that have been published and things like that. So it's a good kind of central hub and resource to kind of gather some of this. And then I would encourage starting there.
Okay.
And with any organization that is interested in implementing a Pets for Life kind of type approach, in that the outreach toolkit that I mentioned, there's kind of information and kind of guidelines on how to do a community assessment, like I mentioned before. And so really kind of digging in and, just starting with some of those basic things, because it pays to take the time to learn and do it right before you kind of ever get out and start knocking on doors. So I would just use that as a guide and kind of connect with your community because they're waiting.
Perfect. We created our own PFL video. So in the notes of this podcast, I will have that link available. Thank you, Jason, and the whole PFL team for all the work that you're doing. And truly, I can't even explain the impact you have made on this organization. I mean, really, almost everything we do is because of the work that you guys are doing. And that you took the time to, right before the holidays and everything, to make time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And thank you for valuing this work and kind of elevating it, and using your position and voice to kind of elevate it and share it with others. Like I said, none of us can do it alone, and it's going to take all of us to kind of continue pushing this movement forward. And I think that hearing about your success and the passion you talk about this work with, it renews me all the time whenever I get to work with all these amazing people who are really taking ownership over this really important work, and it's really wonderful to see, and it's wave of the future.
That's awesome. I love it. It's a good future. It's a future I definitely want to be a part of.
Absolutely. And it's a future where everyone's welcome to help create it.
Yes. Good.